Just a few months ago, I was planning my wedding with Brett, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Now, I'm living in my best friend Angela's spare bedroom, endlessly scrolling through apartment listings, trying to stitch together the life I thought I had. Brett and I met in 2021. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. And after a year and a half, we moved in together. When Brett first introduced me to his parents, his dad, Walt, seemed pleasant enough, if a bit quiet. Susan, on the other hand, spent the entire dinner quizzing me about my background and family connections, with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. I mentioned that my dad worked in construction and my mom was a school aide, and I noticed her expression sour slightly before she masked it. Brett brushed it off later, saying she was just protective and old-fashioned. His exact words were, "She comes from a family that values certain connections," but he assured me he didn't care about that stuff. I believed him because love makes you stupid sometimes. When Brett proposed last year during a weekend trip to a cute little B&B upstate, I was over the moon. We agreed on a medium-sized wedding, nothing extravagant, since we were both saving for a house down payment. The problem started almost immediately after we announced our engagement. Susan insisted on being involved in every single detail. At first, it seemed helpful. She had vendor connections and offered to coordinate since I worked long hours, but it quickly became clear she was taking over. The venue I loved was too shabby. The catering I wanted wasn't the kind of food served at their family event. The dress I fell in love with was a bit cheap looking, don't you think? Brett kept saying it was easier to just go along with her than fight her on everything. I reluctantly agreed to compromise on some things to keep the peace, but it felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Every decision taken away chipped at my excitement until wedding planning felt more like a chore than a celebration. The real turning point came during a dinner at their house a few months before the wedding. Susan had invited her friends Rita and Angela over, and I realized halfway through the evening that I was being paraded in front of them for approval. They exchanged glances whenever I spoke. At one point, Rita asked where I summered as a child. I laughed, thinking she was joking, and explained that our vacations were usually camping at the state park or visiting my grandma in Ohio. The table went silent. After dinner, while helping clean up, Susan cornered me in the kitchen. She started with casual talk about Brett's ex-girlfriend, Melissa, who came from an influential family with a Hamptons vacation home. Then she said she hoped I wouldn't hold Brett back. When I asked what exactly she meant, she dropped all pretense. She told me I wasn't from the right background to help Brett's future, that my lack of refinement would embarrass him in important circles, that I wouldn't know how to entertain properly or make the right connection. I was so shocked I couldn't respond at first. When I finally told her she was being incredibly rude, she just laughed a condescending little laugh and said my defensiveness proved her point. She said Brett deserved someone who could match his potential, not drag him down. I walked out and told Brett we needed to leave. In the car, I was shaking as I told him everything. I expected anger, outrage, something. Instead, he got quiet and said maybe I had misunderstood her tone. That night was our first major fight. Eventually, he admitted his mother had been expressing concerns for months. Apparently, she'd been filling his head with doubts about whether I would fit in with the future he imagined. And the worst part? He was listening to her. Over the next 2 weeks, things deteriorated fast. Brett became distant, stayed late at work, and brought up random concerns that never existed before, like whether our different backgrounds would cause issues raising kids, or if I'd feel out of place at his company events. Then came another dinner at Susan's. Brett said she wanted to apologize and practically begged me to go. Like an idiot, I believed him, but there was no apology. Instead, Susan made backhanded comments all evening about my clothes, my table manners, even the way I spoke. When Brett stepped out to take a call, she leaned in and said, "You're nothing without my son. He can do so much better than you. Walk away before you ruin his life with your ordinariness." When I started crying, she rolled her eyes and said my emotional behavior just proved her point. When Brett returned, I was gathering my things. Susan put on her concerned face and said I had overreacted to some gentle advice about wedding planning. In the car, I gave Brett an ultimatum. Either we cut contact with his mother until she respected me, or the wedding was off. He didn't choose me. He said maybe his mother was right. Maybe we were rushing into things. Maybe we came from two different worlds. So I took off my engagement ring, placed it on the dashboard, and told him to drop me at Angela's. He didn't stop me. The next day, while Brett was at work, I returned to our apartment and packed most of my things. I left my key and a short note saying I'd arranged to get the rest later. I blocked Susan's number immediately. I kept Brett's number unblocked, partly out of curiosity, partly in case he came to his senses. He texted a few days later with a weak message saying he was confused and needed time to think. I replied that there was nothing to think about. Either he was willing to build a life with me based on love and respect, or he wasn't. He responded with, maybe we should take a break until after this big work project wraps up, and then reassess. That was my answer. 3 years together, and he couldn't even properly end things. Just wanted to string me along while he reassessed. I told him not to contact me again. Mutual friends said Brett was telling people we mutually decided to cancel the wedding due to different life goals. Meanwhile, I was trying to rebuild my life. I got a voicemail from Susan. I don't know how she got my new number, but I deleted it after the first sniffled sentence. Whatever drama was happening in their perfect world wasn't my problem anymore. The wedding would have been next weekend. Instead, I took myself on a solo trip to a beach rental I found on Airbnb. Not the honeymoon I'd imagined, but maybe exactly the fresh start I needed. The first month post-breakup was a blur. I stayed on Angela's pull-out couch longer than I'd planned. Every morning, I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for Brett before remembering he was gone. My appetite I'd vanished. I lost 10 pounds without trying. Angela started leaving protein bars on the coffee table because I'd forget to eat. I spent a lot of time staring at apartment listings without making calls. Moving felt too final. Angela never pressured me, but after 3 weeks, she gently suggested we look at a place her friend's building had just listed. It wasn't special, just a tiny one-bedroom with a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, but it was in my budget and close to work. I signed the lease that day. I'd left most of my furniture behind, couldn't deal with arranging movers while emotionally wrecked. Angela and her boyfriend helped me pick up essentials from IKEA: a bed, a couch, a small table that doubled as a desk. The apartment stayed sparse for weeks. I couldn't muster the energy to make it home. Work became my anchor. I showed up early, stayed late, volunteered for extra projects. My team lead noticed and started giving me more responsibilities, training the new hire, coordinating with other departments. It felt good to be needed and respected. 2 months after the breakup, I ran into Brett's brother, Nick, at the grocery store. I almost ducked behind a cereal display, but he saw me first. He looked genuinely uncomfortable and told me he was sorry for what happened, that he'd argued with their mom about how she treated me. It was awkward, but oddly validating to hear someone from Brett's family admit I'd been wrong. That's when I first heard things weren't going great for Brett. A week later, my old college roommate invited me to a party. I almost didn't go, but Angela practically shoved me out the door. At that party, I met Matt. He was the roommate's cousin, in town for the weekend. We ended up in the same conversation circle, and he asked for my number before he left. I surprised myself by giving it to him. Our first date was coffee on a Sunday afternoon. No pressure, just casual. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in months, I went hours without thinking about Brett. Matt worked in a completely different field from Brett, lived in a modest apartment like mine, and had a normal, non-judgmental family. When I gave him a condensed version of my breakup, he just listened. No platitudes, no advice. Around month 3 post-breakup, a surprise opportunity came up at work. My company was restructuring, creating a new team, and needed someone to take on more responsibility. My manager encouraged me to apply, warning me it would mean longer hours and more stress. My confidence was still shaky, but I figured I had nothing to lose. The interview process was grueling: 3 rounds, a presentation I stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting, and a final meeting with upper management. I didn't think I'd get it. There were candidates with more experience, but 2 weeks later, my manager called me into her office and offered me the job. The raise meant I could stop stressing about rent. It wasn't life-changing money, but it helped me start rebuilding my emergency fund, which had taken a hit during the post-breakup chaos. I was still absorbing this good news when I ran into Rita at the mall. I was buying new clothes for my promotion. She spotted me coming out of a store and acted overly friendly. After some small talk, she casually dropped the bomb. Brett had lost his job. The big project he'd used as an excuse for our break had fallen apart. Missed deadlines, poor management. He'd been let go and was struggling. She added, with a poorly disguised smirk, that Melissa had briefly rekindled things with Brett after our breakup, only to dump him again after a few weeks. Then she winked and said, "Maybe you dodged a bullet." A few days later, I had dinner with Matt at a new downtown restaurant. I spotted Susan across the room, dining with Walt and another couple. Our eyes met. I looked away quickly, heart pounding. I expected her to ignore me or give one of her frosty stares. Instead, she walked over to our table. Her face was a study in strained politeness. She commented on how well I looked, asked about my job, how did she even know, and complimented my outfit. When I introduced Matt, her smile tightened noticeably, but she stayed friendly and said she hoped we could catch up properly sometime. Matt was confused but polite. Later, when I explained who she was, he just said she seemed intense. The weirdness didn't stop there. A week later, Angela forwarded me a Facebook message from Brett, asking how I was doing and if I was seeing anyone. She hadn't replied, knowing I wouldn't want my life shared with him. I appreciated her loyalty, but felt unsettled by his sudden interest. Through mutual friends, I learned more. Brett, now unemployed, had moved back in with his parents. The life Susan had carefully curated for him was unraveling, and she wasn't handling it well. Meanwhile, Matt and I were seeing each other regularly, taking things slow. He helped me turn my apartment into a home, installing bookshelves, hanging artwork. Small changes, but they made the space feel more permanent. Work was demanding but fulfilling. Some days, I came home exhausted, doubting myself, but I pushed through, proud that I had taken a risk and it had paid off. Then, last Friday, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Susan. Her voice was thick with tears. She said she'd been trying to reach me, that she made a mistake, that she'd do anything to fix things between me and Brett, that he wasn't doing well. 6 months ago, this woman had told me I was nothing. Now, she was begging me to help her son. I didn't call her back. Instead, I went to Matt's place like we'd planned, but the voicemail played in my head all night. When I told Matt, he didn't push me either way. He just asked what would give me peace. The next morning, I texted the number that had reached out, Brett's new number. I asked what was going on. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Susan. Apparently, she had been using Brett's phone to reach me since I'd blocked her. I almost didn't answer, but I did. That was a mistake. Her voice was desperate, shaky. She asked how I was doing, said I looked great the night she saw me, creepy, and launched into a full apology. She admitted she'd judged me based on shallow things and driven me away. Then she detailed Brett's downfall, how he was drinking too much, making bad financial decisions, depressed. When I asked why she was telling me all this, she said it was because she thought I could help. She said Brett needed someone responsible like me. I was floored. This woman, who once said I wasn't good enough, now thought I was the cure for her broken son. I told her calmly that I was sorry Brett was struggling, but we'd been over for months. I mentioned that I was seeing someone else. Her response: "Rebounds rarely last. You and Brett had real history." She asked to meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, and despite Matt's raised eyebrow when I told him, I agreed. We met the following weekend. Susan looked different, tired, unpolished. She'd ordered my favorite drink, which was unsettling. She laid out Brett's situation again, how he lost his job, burned through his savings, invested in a friend's startup that flopped, and now lived in his childhood bedroom, sleeping until noon. She didn't ask me to take him back, but she did everything except. She repeated that he was at his best with me, that I motivated him, that I was the only one he listened to. When I reminded her she once said I wasn't good enough, she teared up and said she'd been protecting her son from the wrong thing, that I had been the steady influence he needed. I left that meeting feeling more hollow than vindicated. The next day, Susan started calling again. First to follow up on our talk, then to tell me Brett had asked about me, then to tell me about a job opening and wondered if my company was hiring. She left voicemails every day. Desperate, rambling, sometimes bringing up my parents, saying she'd love to make amends with them too. Then Nick, Brett's brother, texted. He apologized for Susan's behavior and told me Brett had started drinking heavily after our breakup. He blamed himself, but said Brett was responsible for his own choices. Don't let her guilt you into anything, he added. Meanwhile, things with Matt were going well. We'd started discussing maybe moving in together when his lease ended. The difference between his support and Brett's chaos wasn't lost on me. 2 weeks after coffee with Susan, she showed up at my workplace. She was in the parking lot, waiting by my car. My heart dropped. She had a folder, Brett's resume, and asked if I could put in a good word for him. I told her firmly that this was inappropriate and needed to stop. She started crying in the parking lot. A few coworkers saw. I guided her to a bench and calmly told her again I couldn't help Brett. Our relationship was over. She left, and I was left mortified and furious. Later that day, Brett texted a long message apologizing for everything, for letting his mom influence him, for not standing up for me. He said he missed me every day. Reading it, I felt nothing. No old longing, just tiredness. Closure. I showed Matt. He said nothing. I didn't respond right away, but Susan didn't give me space. She called the next day asking if I'd seen the message. I told her I thought it was inappropriate for her to be involved. She got defensive. That was the last straw. I told her calmly that I was blocking her number. If she contacted me at work again, I'd report it as harassment. That Brett was a grown man who needed to solve his own problem. And maybe if she'd raised him to value character over status, he wouldn't be in this mess. That night, I finally responded to Brett's text. I told him I forgave him, but we had no future. I'd moved on. I wished him well and told him not to contact me again. Then I blocked them both. The next day, I got an Instagram DM from Susan. She'd created a new account just to message me. This time, her tone was furious. She accused me of being heartless, of abandoning Brett when he needed me most. She said I was throwing away years of history out of pride. That last bit nearly made me laugh. Pride from the woman who torpedoed her son's relationship over classist nonsense. I didn't respond. I blocked that account too. But it didn't stop. She started emailing me from different addresses. She even mailed a handwritten letter to my apartment. Each new contact more desperate than the last. The final straw came last weekend. Matt and I were having dinner at my apartment when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Brett standing there, looking disheveled and clearly drunk. And behind him, hovering like a nervous ghost, was Susan. I was so shocked I couldn't speak. Matt came to the door, asking who it was. When Brett saw him, the look on his face, heartbreak, realization, maybe shame, was almost pitiful. He started talking about how much he regretted everything. Susan kept chiming in, trying to steer the conversation toward a reunion, babbling about how we were so good together. I didn't let them in. Instead, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. I told them gently but firmly this wasn't okay. Showing up uninvited was a massive boundary violation. I reiterated what I had said in my message. I had moved on. I was not Brett's savior, and this situation wasn't mine to fix. What happened next surprised me. Brett turned to Susan and said, "This is why I didn't want to come. I told you this would make things worse." Then he looked at me and apologized, really apologized. Not for the breakup, but for not protecting me from his mother, both then and now. That was the first time I saw any genuine accountability from him. They left. I haven't heard from either since. Nick texted a couple days later. He said Brett had gone to his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I thanked him, but I didn't ask for updates. Matt and I are planning a weekend getaway soon. I changed my email. I've asked my manager to keep an eye out for any unexpected visitors. Life is calm again, stable, joyful even. A year ago, I was planning a wedding to a man who didn't stand up for me. Now, I'm building a new life with someone who respects me, supports me, and never makes me feel like I'm not enough. I don't know if I'll ever post another update. Maybe this is the end of this particular story. But if anyone reading this is dealing with a similar situation, being judged, being undermined, being made to feel like you're not good enough, let me tell you, you are. You are worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions or strings or ultimatums. You are worthy of respect, of safety, of peace, and you don't have to prove yourself to anyone who doesn't see your value from the start. Life goes on, and sometimes it gets better than you could have imagined.